Hi, Peter Jones, Chartered Surveyor, author and property investor here, and I've had a really interesting question. I'm going to disguise the lady's name to protect the innocent. We're going to call her Emily, but Emily has sent through a question because Emily lives overseas and she wants to invest in the UK. And so her question is, we live overseas, so we'll be doing everything from afar. I know that you've built up a portfolio in a part of the country away from where you live. So I was wondering if you have any tips for us of must-dos and must-avoids. Great question. So as Emily is alluding to in the question, I live just outside Nottingham, but I invest in Newcastle. Sometimes people ask me why that happened. It was an accident of history. But the yields in Newcastle at the time I was buying were fantastic, and I found a model that worked which allowed me to buy properties, to refinance, to get all of my money back out and to build a substantial portfolio. So what Emily is asking is, if she lives overseas, what does she need to be thinking about when she's putting together her portfolio? What are the must-dos, what are the must-don'ts? And I think the starting point actually for most people, just putting Emily to one side at the moment, is thinking about where they're going to invest and the strategy that they're going to use to invest. So let's think about this in a very simple way, because I think a lot of property investing is simple. I'm not saying it's easy, but it can be simple. When you think about it, the starting point really comes down to two different variables. There's area and there's strategy. And what we need to decide in most cases, first of all, is either on an area and then work out what works in that area. So for example, most people will start in their area where they live, which makes a lot of sense because it's easy to travel to. Maybe they've already got some local knowledge, etc., etc. So if we're going to start in our local area, we need to look at our local area and decide which property strategies work in that area. And that could be things like single-let, buy-to-lets, HMOs, commercial conversions, rent-to-rents, all that kind of stuff. What's the strategy that works in my local area? Now, having decided that, we can then decide which of those strategies we want to pursue. So that's the sort of starting point number one. Starting point number two could be to think to yourself, I want to be a property investor and I want to do X strategy. And that strategy could be, I want to do single-let buy-to-lets, or I want to do HMOs, or whatever it is, I want to do flips. Whatever it is the strategy that you want to do. So if you know what your strategy is, then the starting point then is probably to look at your local area, because it makes sense to do it in your local area if you can. See if it works in your local area. And if it does, great. But if it doesn't, then the reality is you're going to have to find another area. So for most of us, that would be the starting point. Now, in Emily's position, it's slightly different because she knows that she can't do anything where she is. She's overseas, she wants to do it in the UK. So how would she start? Well, this is the first must-do, I think, Emily, to answer your question very specifically, is to think about what it is you're trying to achieve. The starting point, I would say, even before we start even thinking about strategy in areas, to think about what our property goals are. Because when we understand our property goals, we can then start to think about the right type of property strategy which will help us to achieve our goals. So for example, a lot of people say to me, I want to build a passive income so I can get out of my job. And when I say to them, well, how long do you want to take to get out of your job? Do you want to get out of your job this year or next year or in 5 years' time? Most people say something like, I want to get out of my job as soon as possible. And so I'll point out that building a portfolio with passive income is actually quite a slow way to generate the income to get you out of the job. A quicker way could be, for example, doing flips. Particularly if you do high-value big flips somewhere like London, you could make multiple tens, even hundreds of thousands of pounds on one deal. That money could get you out of your job tomorrow. So why concentrate on putting together a portfolio to create passive income, which could take you 2, 3, 5 years to get you out of your job, when one flip could get you out of your job tomorrow? So there's an understanding required of what it is you're trying to achieve, and trying to then find the right strategy to help you to achieve that. So Emily, think about what you're trying to achieve, and then think about the property strategy which is going to help you to achieve whatever it is you want to achieve. When you know your strategy, then you can start thinking about where that strategy is going to work. So for example, Emily, if you told me I want to do single-let buy-to-lets, I would be saying, well, you're not going to be doing that in London. Why? Because London values are very expensive. It's very hard to get the yields which make buy-to-lets work. That in itself is a whole discussion, because there's a particular strategy around buy-to-lets I'm thinking about. Haven't really got time to go into that now. But when you know what the strategy is, then you can start thinking about the areas of the country and the UK where that strategy will work. So that's starting point number one. Starting point number two for you would be to think about how you're actually going to find your properties. Are you going to fly over to the UK periodically in order to find your properties? And maybe there's a clue there. If you're going to be flying over to the UK to look for your properties, maybe part of where you decide to invest is going to depend upon where you can fly to. Now, I'm not going to say where you are, because obviously we're protecting your anonymity. But where you are, there will be particular regional airports that you can fly into in the UK. Maybe that's going to determine where you're going to invest. And maybe that's going to help determine then the strategy that you're going to choose. So that'd be the starting point. The starting point number three, are you going to do it all on your own, or are you going to have help? Because certainly if I was to start from an overseas position, I would be thinking to myself, well, I don't want to do this all on my own. I'm going to have either a JV partner to help me, to source properties with me, or I'm going to be using a competent and professional property sourcer or agent who I trust and who I know will deliver good deals to me. Now, again, around that, you're probably going to have to do some due diligence. You need to know who you're dealing with. You need to make sure that they're going to provide you with the right kind of properties. And there's going to be a cost involved in that, because there's a quid pro quo. If somebody's going to be out and sourcing the properties for you, they're either going to want a share of the profits or a share of the rent, depending upon how you agree a JV structure, or if they're a sourcer or an agent, they may want a fee for finding the properties. But of course the benefit to you is they're actually using their time, you're not using your time, you're not having to be on the ground actually looking for the properties. I'd suggest that until you have a really good working relationship with somebody though, when they start putting deals to you, that perhaps you just put a day or two in the diary where you fly into the UK, look at as many of the deals as you can, do your due diligence on them, make sure they stack up, make sure that the agents you're using are telling the truth, or that the deals are as good as they say they are, before you start committing yourself. So that would be the third thing I'd do. And then the fourth thing I'd be thinking about is managing the properties, because once the properties are bought and you've got a portfolio and it's building, that's relatively easy. That can all be systemised, it can all be put on autopilot, particularly if you trust and know the people that you're dealing with. But the key thing in all of this, which makes it all possible, the key thing which makes it possible for me to live outside of Nottingham and to be able to invest in Newcastle, is having the right managing agent. And I've got a managing agent in Newcastle who understands my business, who understands what I'm trying to achieve, who understands the type of tenants who go into my properties, and he does a fantastic job. So ultimately, what you will be looking for and what you'll be thinking about is finding the managing agent or managing agents who can allow you to have that freedom to be able to invest at a distance. Now, you may find them straight away, or like me, you might have to go through a period of trial and error. I went through a few managing agents until I found the one who I'm using today. And the others were okay, they weren't terrible, but they weren't that great. It was okay, it was average, mediocre, the service was mediocre. And I went through a number of managing agents until I found one who I knew was giving excellent value. Now, of course, if I hadn't been through the mediocre ones, I wouldn't have known that this particular agent was giving me excellent value, probably. So you've got to think about that as well, how you're actually going to get that experience. Key thing is, don't talk yourself out of it. It's very easy to talk yourself out of doing something. You could say to yourself, well, will this work? I'm at a distance. I know that you said in your message to me that you kind of talked yourself out of it at one stage, that you gave up the idea of investing in the UK because you moved overseas, and you really regret that now. So the key thing is, do something. Get out there and start doing something. But the key thing would be, in summary, think about what it is you're trying to achieve. Think about the strategy which will help you to achieve what you want to achieve. Then have a think about the areas or area where you'll be able to undertake the strategy or strategies that you want to undertake to achieve what you want to achieve. Maybe alongside that, look at where you can get to relatively easily by flying in from where you are, where the local regional airports are, where you've got flights to. That might help you decide where you're going to invest. Think about whether you're going to do it all on your own and then fly over and look for your own deals, or whether you're going to use either a JV partner who can help you source deals, or whether you're going to use an agent or sources, and then think about the management and who's going to look after the management, because it's actually having the management in place which is the key to all of this. The big don't is don't talk yourself out of doing this. It may all seem a little bit overwhelming at the beginning. It probably is a little bit overwhelming at the beginning, but the thing is, when you get started, systems and processes will evolve as you get used to it. The first one is always the worst and the hardest. When you get to the 10th or the 12th or the 20th, you'll look back and think, I wonder why I thought it was so hard, because the systems will be in place, the experience will be in place, you'll know what you're doing. So put the effort into getting the first 1 or 2 deals. After that, it'll become much easier and you'll be glad that you did it. So Emily, I hope that helps. I felt like I was rambling a little bit, but I think those are the key things that you need to be thinking about. And here's to successful property investing.